Mayor and Council, I'm happy to present the strategic planning document to you tonight. We'll talk about it in a moment. You should have 3 documents that will be in the office of the city clerk. They'll also be posted to the website after approval by the city council. First is the strategic plan itself, this impressive-looking 3-ring binder, as well as the executive summary, which we will go through today on the strategic planning effort. And lastly, a document that originally was not contemplated in this effort, but was intended to help apprise the council of the operations that city departments engage in every day, as well as a document that can be available to the public, so that when the public sees city crews out, wonders what does the city supervisor do in a day, or the city clerk, or anybody else, can look in this document and see the whole bunch of things, the day-to-day activities that these departments engage in. So hopefully it'll remove a little bit of the mystery of what goes on at City Hall and in city operations. So the intent is to help educate the public and put them in a position where they understand the workings of their city government, as well as mapping out the differences, the priorities, and the resources that the city has. So we'll go through this. We'll be as brief as we can, but we're going to move along fairly quickly. We started this process in October of 2014. In August of that year, we'd identified a consultant to assist us with the process. That was Dr. John Luthi of the Futures Corporation of Boise, and we identified him to help us with it. And that was in October 1st of 2014. We had stakeholder kickoff meetings, and then we moved on down through the different meetings that you see listed in front of you. Major challenge areas is where we ended up at a council workshop on May 12th of 2015, which assisted us to develop the FY 2016 budget, and will help us hopefully to guide our processes in the future as well. The idea is that this document is plan-based but fact-driven. In other words, we've talked about planning for years, but we want our plans to be driven by what is actually out there in the field. So when we started a process back in 2002 and 2003, we engaged in a strategic planning process at that time. Actually, what it told us is that we were doing a pretty good job of anticipating and meeting city and community needs on about a 1 to 3 year basis, typically following election cycles. But that wasn't the case. It wasn't the case that they were driven by elections as much as they were driven by a lack of continuing resources. We did not have master plans for a lot of our operations at that time, and so that strategic plan basically talked about you need to show where you are and where you want to go in your individual operations before you can prioritize those operations against each other when divvying up what, as you know, are pretty lean resources for a city of Moscow's size, with property tax limitations that we have imposed by the legislature, lack of a local option sales tax, so on and so forth. So those plans that you see in front of you, from the master facilities plan, which will be presented to you next week, or excuse me, in 2 weeks, just had a couple of tweaks to it that we cleaned up. It was presented in a workshop earlier this fall, and it will come back to you for approval. These other plans that you see in front of you, there's only one that's missing at this point, and that is a long-range financial plan. It'd be easy to blame Don Palmer wholly for that, but I will take some of the responsibility myself. That Don should be. Don's not here, so
he's busy getting awards.
He gets the blame. At any rate, that will be ready in the next couple months. But as you can see, each of those plans, and each of those plans has been reviewed and accepted by the City Council. And there is a ton of documentation in those plans. And as you also know, each of those plans carries a price tag for the facilities and the personnel resources to implement all of those plans to the utmost. It'd be a huge number if you calculated all of them together. That's the job of the long-range financial plan. But at least now we have a baseline to go from, and we have a long-range outlook. Yes, sir?
Dan's got a question.
Going back then, before we get to these, all these plans that we've adopted before the strategic plan, is there going to be a lot of effect to go back in, that we need to go back to those to make them fit the strategy, basically?
I think what you'll see is the long-range financial plan will take each of the financial projections, the necessities of each of these plans. We'll put those in the long-range financial plan, and we'll just have to work backwards. Each of these, as you know, the sewer system, water system, sanitation are enterprise funds driven by rates. A lot of these other ones are driven by other things, and mostly general fund, property taxes, grants, that sort of thing. So we've got a whole bunch of different ways to do this, but in essence, you're exactly right. What will happen is each of the priorities will be weighed against other priorities, and the council will make decisions on where they want those dollars to be spent.
So these plans are where we're getting our major challenge areas.
Exactly. Exactly. So there's been a ton of work over the last dozen years leading up to this point. So a lot of work's been done that isn't reflected in this presentation tonight.
Well, the good news is all those plans that have had dust built on them over the years were
Some of them have. Some of them have
implemented,
are in various stages of implementation. But that, in essence, is our strategic planning library. And those documents will be available on the web. They'll be available at City Hall, at the city clerk's office, for anybody who wants to check on what is going on in the planning world and how we're approaching these problems. When I say problems, looking out, instead of looking at the 1 to 3 year time line, we're really trying to look out 5, 10, and 20-year time frames, and even beyond that in some of these plans.
Challenge areas.
Challenge areas, exactly.
We're learning things from this guy.
There you go. And you're teaching me the other way. Okay, strategic planning documents. You got your operational overviews that I talked about, the executive summary, which I would encourage everybody to read and the public to take a look at. And if you want to dig deeper than that, the plans themselves. As you know from the plans are extremely detailed. They were prepared by the departments, individual departments who are familiar with the operations and challenges of the city, presented to City Council, and City Council then prioritized the ones that they thought were major. So these were the three major things that drove our trends, and those were the tax implications, and that essentially is what is our revenue source, our major revenue source for the general fund. University of Idaho enrollment, which has been dipping down in recent years, but as the main economic engine of the city of Moscow or the community of Moscow, of very much concern. And unemployment. Are we utilizing our workforce capably? Are they employed to their fullest extent? So there's just in the executive summary, we talked about some of the citywide accomplishments. There's a bunch of them up there. This is a smattering of those. Some of them are from the previous century, the Moscow Volunteer Fire Department. Some of them are extremely recent, such as the Moscow School District Community Playfields. We could have had a list that is as long as the executive summary. These were some of the major ones that came to mind, and some of the ones that were brought up in the strategic plan itself. So, desired legacies. What were we hoping to achieve? What did the council indicate in their interviews with Dr. Luthi that they wanted to leave the community? And that is collaborative and communicative relationships. And I'll just go through these very quickly. I won't read all the slides. A vibrant and healthy business community, appropriate, affordable housing for our citizens, safety, goodwill, and collaborative spirit of the community, a workforce that's innovative and therefore fully employed. Members of business and professional communities are, first of all, they understand and they're happy with city services, that they're getting good value for their tax dollar or rate dollar. Exceptional public management, we feel, is the due of the community. If they deserve to have the policymakers and the professional staff do their jobs to the utmost. Parks and rec opportunities that will have an economic impact, boost business and tourism growth. Terrorism. I've been reading too much timely news.
Oh my.
And improved, durable, and cost-effective transportation utility infrastructure. And, of course, as we talk about the water plan, the sewer plan, sanitation plan, at any rate, the planning documents, we want to make sure that we're looking at our utility infrastructure and then it's being sized correctly and is being replaced when it needs to be. Those city priorities flow from those initiatives. Economic development, facilities and infrastructure, revenue resources, equipment, programming, planning, and customer service were the 6 priorities that were identified as being major. And of course, those are huge areas, and the strategic plan boils or at least expands all of these. It's kind of like one of those trees that you have a basic idea and then you have a dozen offshoots on things that feed into that idea. The major challenge areas are things the council looked at. These were the major challenge areas that the council identified in the March and May workshops. You can see on the top, deteriorating pavement conditions were one of the ones that the council put at the top of theirs. Aesthetic condition of the city's main highway entryways. We have projects that are moving ahead with that. Had some in place last year and moving those forward. Inadequate facility inspection, commercial pre-plans for fire. We also talked about the declining enrollment at the University of Idaho as being a big issue, and inadequate law enforcement radio infrastructure and facilities. So declining employment were all major challenge areas. 3 tiers, the most important being Tier 1, and then cascading down Tier 2 and Tier 3. Yes,
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
if I may. Gary, I must have missed it. I know all of those challenge areas are found in the documents, but not in a listing like that. Is that, did I miss it?
No, that was done by council in May.
Should that not,
Well, they're listed in the executive, but not,
not where you
That
can.
format.
Where you can look at them like that.
Right.
They're,
Yeah, we can certainly add that.
I mean, and if you, just a suggestion, and if you need to date it as approved by council X date, because it will change over time, that would be okay.
Okay.
But I've had a little bit of a struggle checking to see if certain ones are stayed in and all that, and it's a lot of page flipping, and that kind of listing.
yeah,
would
that
be
fits
more-
over about 5 pages in just the executive
Yeah,
summary.
That'd be very helpful.
I think that makes good sense, and it gives us a way to historically follow which council had these priorities, if they're looked at every year or every couple of years. we
And they
could
can be
update it.
compared.
You bet.
As to how it's moved and how much, what we've accomplished.
Okay?
And
No,
and
that's
I
good.
presume an external page and an internal page.
You bet.